Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Alvita Nulani, and this video is to present the final term project for Sociolinguistics lecture. This presentation will consist of two parts. For part one, consists of two topics that are gender exclusive speech and stereotypes, while part two contains of case study. For part one is gender exclusive speech. Okay, so imagine if the word hello was only allowed to be used by men, and women had to say something completely different, and that is what we call as gender exclusive speech. It is not just about men or women preferring certain words, it is a strict rule. If you use the wrong word for your gender, it sounds grammatically wrong or socially strange. So there are three main things to know about this. The characteristics first is a strict binary. You don't mix and match. Man and woman have entirely different vocabularies for the exact same meaning. And it is like a name tag where the second you speak the words, you announce your gender to the room. And it is also deeply social. It shows us that in some cultures, gender is so important that the grammar of the language forces you to state it every time you open your mouth. So, to understand why this happens, we look to linguist Janet Holmes. She explains that this kind of language usually pops up in societies that historically had very separate and traditional roles for men and women. The language basically evolved to mirror those separate words. And we come to example. The example comes from real world example from Thailand. If you watch street interviews on YouTube, you will notice something interesting right away, where the man and woman interviewer use totally different words to say the word I, and they use entirely different words to be polite at the end of their sentences, like the word use of crab and ha. So we look at the detailed example one from male speaker. The original text is Sawadee krap, means hello. And for the female speaker, Sawadee ha, with the same meaning as hello. So here is what that looks like in action, where the male interviewer will say "Phom" for I and end his greeting with crab. And a female interviewer uses dichon for I and ends with ha. They are standing on streets doing the same job, but the language forces them to use different polite words based purely on their gender. For the analysis, going back to Janet Holmes' theory, we can see that the language is acting as a daily enforcer of social rules. These aren't just random vocabulary words. To be seen as polite, professional, and respectful interviewer in Thailand, you must follow these gender rules. The grammar simply doesn't give you a neutral option. So academic research backs this up perfectly, where the first study by Howard shows that this starts in childhood, where Thai children are drilled by their teachers, by their families, to use these exact polite words, where crap for boys and ha for girls. It is ingrained in them that is the only way to be a proper citizen. And the second study by McCready that shows these words are the ultimate tools for formality. You don't just use them to show your gender, you use them to establish exactly how formal and respectful the conversation needs to be. So what we can interpret here, linguistic features and social meanings. The word crab and ha carry the social meaning of I am a man being polite and I am a woman being polite, and the identity construction. On camera, the interviewers are constructing their identities as polite and approachable Thai hosts, and the context of communication, street interviews represent public and polite interactions, while the power relations, as the interviewers are the ones approaching the strangers, they need to show friendliness and deference, making the gender politeness particles absolutely mandatory. Here, the comparison between examples. The similarity is both hosts are performing the same social function, where asking engaging questions about the Thai languages to strangers, and they both use a politeness particle at the end of their sentence. And the difference is the vocabulary chosen by the speaker's gender, crab and ha. The patterns of language use, the paper shows that even in modern casual media like YouTube, formal interactions with strangers will still heavily rely on gender exclusive speech. So to wrap up, gender exclusive speech means um, man and woman use totally different words to accomplish the exact same thing, like showing respect to a stranger, and it exists because languages mirror to the history and the structure of their societies, and these street interviews show as that language is never just about passing along information. So every time a Thai speaker asks a simple question to a stranger, they are simultaneously practicing and reinforcing their culture's rules about gender, respect, and also identity. Okay, so now we are talking about linguistic stereotypes. In social linguistics, this happens when willing a specific way of speaking, like an accent or a dialect or certain vocabulary, to a simplified and usually negative belief about a group of people. And it is also about how dominant groups use language to label, box in, or push down other groups based on their race, gender, or class. So for the characteristics and concepts, there are two major concepts to understand here. First is standard language ideology. This is the false belief that one specific way of speaking is naturally better or more connect than all others, and linguistic profiling, where this is when people make judgments about your intelligence, your character, your wealth, and using nothing but sound of your voice or your grammar. So why does this matter? Because it shows us that grammar policing is rarely just about grammar. Language is deeply tied to power, and often prejudice hides behind the mask of just wanting people to speak correctly. So to understand this, we'll look at two major theorists. Janet Holmes explains that the society often treats the language of the dominant group, usually for white middle-class men, and the default is norm, and anyone outside of that, like women or minority groups, is judged as overly emotional. Well, Rosina Lippi-Green adds to this by showing how the media actively enforce these rules, constantly telling us whose language is good and whose is bad. So let's look at the example, where in example one is about gender stereotyping in sports media. In the example, is about when tennis champion Serena Williams got frustrated on the court, and newspaper called it as an epic meltdown and a tantrum, complete with an insulting cartoon. And for example two is about dialect stereotyping, with the dialect AAV in the justice system and media. It is about the during the tragic George Zimmerman trial, a key witness named Rachel Gentle spoke in AFV or African American Vernacular English, and the media and the public heavily criticized her, calling her English broken and saying she lacked credibility purely because of how she spoke. We move to the sociolinguistics phenomenon. In example 1 of Serena Williams, we see gender framing here. So when male athletes argue, the media uses strong, assertive words like passionate or competitive, but for a female athlete, the media shifted to words you would use for a toddler like tantrum, and they used vocabulary to turn a fierce competitor into an emotionally unstable child. While for example 2, for Russell Gentle, we see linguistics profiling where the media didn't just ask Rachel to speak up, they equated her dialect directly with lack of intelligence and education, completely dismissing her dialect as valid. So for the analysis, if we apply our theories to these examples, it all clicks into place where Janet Holmes' theory explains exactly what happened to Serena Williams, where her behavior was judged unfairly against a male norm, and Rosina Lippi-Green's theory explains the treatment of racial gentle, where they discriminating against someone because of their dialect is one of the lost forms of prejudice that society will and still widely accepts. So here, for example 1, a 2011 study by Eagleman looked at Olympic coverage and proved that the media consistently frames male athletes as powerful while framing female athletes around their emotions and also their appearance. So the word tantrum is part of a systemic pattern. And for example 2, a 20 a 2016 study by Rickford and King proves that Russell was speaking a highly structured and systemic version of AFV dialect, and her language was not broken at all. The jury and the media simply let their linguistic stereotypes blind them to the facts. So to see the comparison, when we compare these examples, these cases, we see striking similarities where both targets were Black women, showing how racial and gender stereotypes often combine. And in both cases, language was used as a weapon to strip away their authority. And the main difference is the target, where Serena was stereotyped for her behavior using gender-biased words, and Rachel was stereotyped for her dialect as an attack of her intellect. And one damage of a professional reputation is the other influence a homicide trial. Next is conclusion. So the main takeaway in this language is never neutral, and the word choices are loaded with cultural biases. And linguistic stereotypes are not just harmless jokes, they have real and tangible consequences. They dictate who gets hired and who is respected and who is believed on the witness stand. If we want to dismantle the social inequality, we have to start by critically analyzing the language we use and consume every single day. And here is the slide that shows the resources that I citate. Now we move into part 2 with 7 case study. First is the gender exclusive speech case study. So with the 5 question for number 1, what is gender exclusive speech? It is the language that treats one gender and it is usually male as the default for all people. For example, is he, his, or man. And why can the manager's language be considered gender exclusive? His is presented as covering everyone, but it linguistically centers men and excludes the female employees who are part of the audience, and what social and linguistic effects may result from such language. So there are two. Social effects can induce feelings and lower self-esteem among women, and linguistic effects normalizes male-centric phrasing in professional discourse, and what alternative language forms could be used. There are two alternative language for singular they. So the example here, every employee must submit their report, and using the pluralization also helps with all employees must submit their reports. And number 5 is to analyze. In Journal Article 1 by Stout and Dasgupta, the study demonstrates that women exposed to gender exclusive language in professional settings report lower feelings of belonging and reduce their motivation. And Journal Article 2 in 2016 highlights how language policy is moving away from the generic masculine toward gender fair language. For case study 2 is density. So what is linguistic density? It is a measure of how much information is packed into a text or utterance. It is typically calculated by looking at the ratio of content words contained of nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs that carry the core meaning to function words that contain prepositions, conjunctions, and pronouns. And how does density affect communication and comprehension? So high density packs a massive amount of meaning and makes the message highly informative and precise. So it can drastically increases the cognitive load for the listener or reader. And which lecturer uses higher linguistic density? For the lecturer B uses much higher linguistic density because their statement contains of numerous complex content words in a single sentence. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of dense language? So for the advantages, it is highly efficient, precise, and allows for the communication of deeply complex concepts. And for disadvantages, using it in spoken lectures often results in a loss of audience attention and comprehension. And number 5 is to analyze using the theory. For Journal Article 1 by Ure in 1971, it established the foundational metric that spoken texts generally have a lexical density, and Journal Article 2 by Fang in 2004 discusses how the dense, abstract language used in academic and scientific contexts can act as a barrier to student learning. Next is case study number 3 is complexity. Number 1 is what is linguistic complexity. It refers to the ways in which language can be structurally, syntactically, and lexically intricate. And number 2, which version demonstrates greater complexity, it is version B, where it uses a long relative clause and it is embedded between the subject and the main verb phrase. Number three, how can syntactic complexity affect understanding? So more clauses increase working memory load and slowing processing and lowering comprehension. And number four, when is complex language appropriate in legal documents, technical manuals, or formal academic literature? And number five is to analyze Journal Article 1 by Just and Carpenter. The paper explains that comprehension of syntactically complex sentences is directly constrained by working memory. And for Article 2 by Biber, their research highlights that institutional and formal written registers tend to favor high structural elaboration to convey authority and precision. Next is case study about style in sociolinguistics. So what is language style? It is the variation in language use depending on the context, the audience, and the communicative purpose. And how do the two message differs stylistically? In first message, it is highly informal and casual. It is using the slang greeting, what's up, and uses an acronym ASAP. And second message is formal, respectful, and standard. It is using a traditional salutation and politeness, also closes with a formal expression of gratitude. And why is the second message more appropriate? Because it correctly navigates the social distance and power dynamics between a student and a professor. And how does style influence interpersonal relationships? So style is a primary tool for signaling respect, social proximity, and understanding the boundaries. And number five is analyze. In Journal Article 1, the study proves what occurs in the case study when students send overly casual emails that violate expectations of academic formality. In Journal Article 2, examines how students formulate requests to faculty in digital environments. Next is case study about context. So, what is context in sociolinguistics? The linguistics and situational environment consists of participants, setting, prior discourse, purpose, and shared knowledge that shapes interpretation. And why can the same expression have different meanings? Because words and expressions are frequently polysemous, means having multiple meanings, and subject to semantic shift over time. And what contextual factors influence interpretation? It can be age and generation, social setting, body language, and also tone. And how does context affect communication? Because it provides the necessary clues for listeners to fill in the blanks, resolve the ambiguities, and grasp the pragmatic meaning. And number five is to analyze. In Journal Article 1 discusses how language variation, such as slang, is used to construct social identity and states. And Journal Article 2 highlights how adolescents are the primary drivers of linguistic innovation and semantic shifting. We move into the case study about register. So, what is register? It is a variety of language used for a specific purpose. It is characterized by specific vocabulary, syntax, and also tone. So, why does the doctor use different language in different situations? So, the doctor adjusts their language to meet the communicative needs of different audiences. For the first statement, uses medical jargon among medical professionals. And the second statement ensures the patient's family can comprehend the diagnosis without possessing medical expertise. And what factors influence register choice? It can be field, tenor, like relationships or status, mode, like in written or spoken, audience expertise, and also purpose. And how does register affect communication effectiveness? Matching register to audience maximizes comprehension and trust. And number five is to analyze. In Journal Article 1 demonstrates that physicians often overestimate patients' health literacy and rely too heavily on medical jargon, that leading to poor health outcomes and confusion. In Journal Article 2, the doctor uses the medical voice in the chart but switches to align with the family's um, everyday language. So next is case study about stereotypes. So number one is what are linguistic and social stereotypes. In linguistic stereotypes, it refers to the beliefs about how specific groups of people speak. For example, is women are more polite or talkative, and in social stereotypes, it is oversimplified, rigid beliefs about the characteristics, attributes, and behaviors of a specific group of people. For example, is men are natural leaders. And how can stereotypes be reflected and reinforced through language? So, language reflects stereotypes when individuals use broad and generalized statements. For example, using words like naturally or always to categorize entire demographic groups. And what are the potential consequences of stereotypes in professional environment? It can be biased evaluation and promotion, restricted roles, reduced motivation, stereotype threat, and also conflict. How can language be used to reduce stereotypes? We can use individualizing, evidence-based, non-essentializing language, and avoid group generalizations. Also, adopt inclusive and competence-focused wording. Number five is to analyze. In Journal Article 1 explains how stereotypes regarding gender, like women as communal or communicative, men as authentic or leaders, create prejudice against female leaders. And Journal Article 2, they details the linguistic intergroup bias or LIB, where language is used to describe positive in-group behaviors and negative out-group behaviors abstractly, making them seem like permanent traits. So this slide shows the resources for the case study. And that's all. Thank you for listening and have a good day. See you.